Trinidad and Tobago, Senator the Honorable Clarence Rambharat, here to report to you on his ministry.
Thank you very much, my colleague in the Senate, Laurel Lizama Lising. My predecessor, and that is part of what makes this job a real challenge, Honorable Prime Minister and political leader, Dr. Keith Rowley, preceded me as Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, and boy, that makes this job hard. He did a very good job, and even before that, his entry into the public service, as he reminds me so many times, was as a fisheries officer. So he also has me on the fisheries side. And if you had any doubts about his ability to lead, to discern, and to display the sort of integrity that this country needs, you saw it on display this afternoon. And I, as a member of the cabinet, as a PNM, and as a citizen, felt very happy for what the Prime Minister discussed with the country today. My colleague, Minister Foster Cummings, who talked about all those who walked with him and somehow forgot that even when there was an incumbent MP, he had me in this constituency chairing and doing all kinds of meetings with him and making me get buff. But it was buff well worth it. And Foster, I know some walk to get you here, but I work to keep you here, and you know why. We've just come through an important exercise in the lower house involving the annual budget process. And I could say this, in the budget process, it goes to the Senate from Monday. I could say this, to me, the most important part of these proceedings is that opportunity that the opposition gets to question ministers in the Standing Finance Committee. To me, that is the most important thing. They could ask anything, and you see they're capable of asking anything foolish. And they get as much time as they need. And it is not interesting to me who are the ones who show up and ask. It's more interesting who are the ones who do not show up and ask. Because after last year, Standing Finance Committee, I made the point that even my winning opponent in Chaguanas East didn't see it necessary to come during the 3 hours I was there to ask me a single question relating to a constituency that is significantly agriculture. I never saw or heard the MP for Moruga Tablan, which is almost totally agriculture and fisheries. And I went down the list. And I thought that they would make up this year because I was there for almost 3 hours. And again, my winning opponent in Chaguanas East never showed up to ask me anything. The MP for Moruga showed up and asked, I think, 1 or 2 questions. And the rest were also ran nebulous. But there's one thing that struck me in those 5 days. Not one opposition MP, given 5 days and so many hours, could point a finger at a minister that appeared in the Standing Finance Committee. Not one. No allegation. Nothing that caused anybody to be concerned. You see, you could say a lot of things in Davie and Pinal and Canaham and Charlieville, or you could say what you want. But if you can't hold people responsible in the parliament and you're not willing to address the nation's issues there, then you are wasting your time and my time. And I felt good. I saw my colleague Senator Sinanan, Rohan Sinanan, yesterday for what must have been a record time in a contentious and difficult Ministry of Works ministry. not an allegation or anything, not anything, except foolish questions to us to answer. And we have no problem answering those. And when I appeared before the Standing Finance Committee, from the outset, I set out to address in the place where it needed to be addressed this issue of this stimulus fund. Because I know a lot of people were thinking and were persuaded to think and encouraged to think that this stimulus was going to be a machine printing checks and sending it out to people. And it was never, no matter how many times I've said, it was never intended to be that. This came out of the Roadmap Committee, and it is meant to set agriculture on a stronger platform going forward. And the 500 million was not intended to be spent in 1 year or 2 years or anything like that. It's a fund. And it's a fund that is meant to do the things we believe that we have to do. And I've heard them saying that not a cent was spent. So I took the opportunity to remind them that the way the budgetary process works, we spend maybe the first year in planning and developing, in some cases developing in terms of the homestead, engineering drawings and doing surveys and doing a lot of things before we could even go out to tender. And I gave them the list of things and I said, between last fiscal, when we committed 345 million of that 500 million, and this fiscal year when we'd commit 145 million, 490 million of the 500 has been committed. And that 345 million is to address some fundamental issues, because I listened to one opposition MP talking every time there was something about vacancies. He was saying, what about the young people looking for jobs? But in no sincere manner, sincere manner at all. I saw the Newsday say today that in that Standing Finance Committee, I said, I'm still cleaning up the UNC mess. And the article faithfully reported what I said. And when I hear them talk about young people, I spoke in that Standing Finance Committee about the $400 million in roads. I could easily have said to the opposition and the country yet again, even after settling $533 million in litigation involving EMBD and construction contracts, I still have $3.8 billion to deal with, $3.8 billion. 3.8 billion plus 533 million plus the 400 million for the roads, that could have employed a lot of young people. So don't believe them. There are fundamental things to do in this country, and the first thing I would say about the money already committed is this homestead project. Because the young people are saying to us, and the homestead project is aimed to address two policy issues. Young people are saying to us, yes, they want to get into agriculture, but they also want a place to live. And this country had a history. In the early PNM days, when the PNM, through policy, developed Carlson Field, Waller Field, Northeast Trinidad, Tobago, Kunjal and Barrackpore, food crop projects across the country, the PNM also developed homestead projects. And this is the second coming of it, recognizing that it is possible on 1.5 acres to 2 acres for somebody relatively new in farming to build a house and to establish a stream of income via agriculture. And the first two projects are in El Reboso, just outside of Sangre Grande. My friend Roger pleaded for that. And here in Talparo, as MP Cummings has said. A big commitment, and that is not just a commitment, but an expenditure of that 345 million was in the food boxes. And you all know what it did. That is something we've talked about for a long time. In fact, every farmer in this country sets out to farm in the hope that the state would buy the produce. The state going back to an old model in agriculture with central marketing agency where you just grow. You wake up a morning and you plant and you grow. And the state was going to buy it and throw it away and do nothing with it. And a lot of farmers tell you that. I hope to sell to school feeding, to the hospital, to everybody. And it does not materialize because it simply does not work that way. But for a long time, we've been talking about the very generous social benefit program that this country has, very generous, multi-billion-dollar program, social safety net. And we have been saying, and Prime Minister has been saying, long before he was Prime Minister, that a component of our social safety net should be fruits and vegetables on the tables of those who need it the most, recognizing the inherent nature of the food card. They're quite capable. The most vulnerable, people most in need of nutrition, are likely to spend it, given the opportunity, on things that are unhealthy and unnecessary. And this is a precursor to that. In response to COVID, we recognized that we could not give the traditional hampers and food cards and so on alone. These were persons, these were families who were trapped inside their homes. And at that time during COVID, I know a lot of alcohol sold, but a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables and good food also sold. And that food box program, criticized at the start, but the MPs, the opposition MPs, could not. There was one of them who, he's aware, he said the bags were 210 pounds. They were $210, and they weren't 60 or 70 pounds. And I wanted to tell him something, since he's very good at numbers. The program ran between May and September 2021, and for 146 days, that MP could walk from his office to where the boxes are being prepared and say to somebody there, my boxes are quarter the size as everybody's boxes across the country. And for 146 days, he did absolutely nothing. He did absolutely nothing. And they do that because they know the truth. The truth is that all their constituents and everybody who received it, and at the end of it, even though the budget catered for 125,000 families to benefit, we did exactly what we said. By careful management of the program, we would get to 185,000 families across the country. And we did that. 136,000 via the 41 MPs and 49,000 via the 138 councillors and the 12 assemblymen in Tobago. We also were able to distribute more than $50 million to over 300 farmers across the country. We were able to support the local poultry industry by taking chicken from them at a very good price and spending about $7 million. We were able to employ people, create jobs, and set the basis for that program to be a permanent part of the suite of benefits offered under the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. That $345 million also include continued expenditure on the issue of land tenure, and I'll talk a little bit more about land tenure. And it included the work we've been doing on the PPP projects, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. What remains, the second part of it, is the $145 million we've committed to spend this year from that fund. And the most important part of that is in roads. And I heard somebody murmur that the roads were essentially roads on the northern part of Trinidad. The northern part of Trinidad. And I didn't wait for anybody to ask me. I said, in the 5-year period, 2015 to 2020, our ministry repaired 101.5 kilometers of agriculture access roads at a cost of about $27 million. 93% of those roads were South and Central Trinidad Road. And not because of anything, because there's a formula. The county officers make the recommendations, and we select those roads for repair that make the biggest impact. In other words, if you have a road that will cost $1 million and help 10 farmers, and one that will cost $1 million and help 20 farmers, we go with the one that will help the 20 farmers. And we will continue to do that under the regular program. But while roads have been developed and the EMBD, that one project, 400 million, was only 10 roads. The fact is that in places like Matlot, Grand Riviere, Sans Souci, come right down to Brooklyn Settlement in Sangre Grande, in Maracas, St. Joseph, right there in Orange Grove, in La Horquetta, Talparo, in Las Lomas, right down the East-West corridor to those concrete roads that my predecessor developed when he was Minister of Agriculture, the Honorable Prime Minister, those concrete roads in Paramin. There are roads in this country that are agriculture access roads that are so far gone, yet servicing so many important farmers that we will not get another opportunity to spend money on those roads, and we are focusing on those roads I've just described. In saying all of that, they didn't mention, nobody pointed to the fact that 80 million for roads, but 11 million for the area of Plomita, which is a constituency that is not represented by us, but which is a significant food basket in this country. And we saw in this food box program the performance of the farmers in Plomita, but they have very old infrastructure in particular. Plomita and the river, Biche is a very complex area in terms of water management. Plomita is in the river swamp. The farming is done in a significant part of the swamp. Water management is critical. And the pumps that are there are 35-year-old pumps, and we've committed $9.5 million to replace those pumps. We've replaced one already, and there's some other infrastructure work that has to be done. In this year, NAMDEVCO continues to perform well, but the infrastructure that they use to support particularly the food boxes, that facility in Chaguanas that is basically an open warehouse space, we're going to spend $20 million to develop that into a modern packing house for this food box program that I said is a permanent feature of our social benefits program. We're going to also spend money to upgrade the facility at Piarco. We have also digital transformation. Our segment of digital transformation in the ministry really concentrates on land tenure and all the other aspects of the ministry. But the main thing has been dealing with land tenure. And from 2015 to now, every year we've spent money on the development of the IT infrastructure, on dealing with the backlog of files, on digitizing our files and all of that. And we've completed the work with iGovTT to actually move to the IT system that we'd use to drive our land administration going forward. And on the issue of land, Prime Minister mentioned to me, I don't know how Prime Minister hears everything on every radio and every television station. I don't know. But he mentioned to me that he heard somebody saying that the problem with the farmers is that they are not getting land tenure. Well, I will tell you this, as I've said all over the country so many times. Land tenure is a problem for farmers. But our best farmers in this country, 50% in Nariva Mayaro, more than 50% in Caroni County, our best farmers are squatters. For them, they have defied the difficulties of not having land tenure, and they've been producing. But for them to produce into future generations, they must have land tenure. So the issue is not land tenure alone. And if you thought that land tenure automatically leads to agriculture production, well, I've said to the country, as part of a P&M policy in the transition from sugarcane to some other crop and some other form of agriculture, the European Union gave us significant funding to transition. And part of that transition involved the provision by the P&M of these 2-acre parcels to the former Caroni workers. And I've reported that of the more than 7,000 2-acre parcels that have been distributed, and distributed not just by word, but via leases, with all the infrastructure, roads and everything built, I reported to the country last year, after an extensive exercise by the EMBD, I reported that about 14% of those 7,000 something parcels are actually being used in some form of agriculture. And when you check it, our friends like numbers, that unused land represents the wastage of about $15 billion invested by this country, about $15 billion invested. And we have been committed to follow the process and invoke the clauses in those leases that allow us to recover those lands. And we have to do that, because if we don't do that, no new land is being created. If we don't do that, we'd never be able to distribute lands for people across the country who are serious about agriculture. So in relation to Caroni alone, because Prime Minister was saying that the person was saying that we have not done anything in agriculture. Well, in relation to Caroni 1975 Limited alone and their VSEP with residential parcels and 2-acre parcels, we were able to clean up the title issues in about 7,500 parcels. In relation to residential land, in Dundonald Hill alone, where the PNM acquired land in order to protect those persons who were living on privately owned estates where they worked in agriculture. Dundonald Hill was a former lime estate. We have 1,100 houses, families, who are to be regularized there. Cabinet has already approved that. In Bades lands, in the constituency of Chaguanas East, where that area, part of enterprise, grew up over a period of time. It was swamp once. That land was quarried for the development of Chagaramas and for the development of other infrastructure in this country, leaving a big pit. People went in there and lived, and 60 years after, they never saw anything resembling regularization. And we have 1,300 families in that area, Bades lands, who are in the process of being regularized, and 200 families in the place known as Mission in Arima, 100 in Rio Claro, Guayaguari, and across the country. That alone, those 4 that I've just described, there's much more. There's 2,700 families benefiting from policy decisions we've made. And on the agriculture side, we've already dealt with, on the state land side, more than 2,500 parcels of land. Many of them. This week when I distributed letters, one lady said to me, Minister, is 42 years awaiting. I posted on Facebook the gentleman who broke down in tears. We know what has been happening, we know. But the thing about it, land tenure, I believe, is a motivation factor, not for the older generation of farmers, but the children of farming families who with a lease would be able to see 30 years renewable for 30 years, 60 years down the road in a manner that none of the administrations opposed to us, even the one that just left, has ever been able to do. And let me tell you about Wallerfield in particular. Wallerfield has a particular issue, and that is that the people who have been on those lands are no longer interested in agriculture. They're not interested in agriculture. And what has developed in this area, in Wallerfield area, the conscientious farmers are renting land on a short-term basis from those people who are not interested in the land. And when they do that, I met with a farmer yesterday, 3 parcels, 1 in Mexico Road, 2 on Wallerfield, Block C, 2 parcels. A young man, 34 acres under production. Many, many workers. I saw people planting pawpaw, people doing this and doing that. So we have to make an important intervention in Wallerfield. And we have to ensure that those farmers who are renting land on a year-to-year basis, that we allocate land to them. We allocate land to them, and that is what we've been doing. But those persons who are not using the 20-acre parcels for agriculture, we have to deal with them, because it does not only constitute a drain on our land resources, it constitutes a health hazard. Many of those plots are poorly kept, many of them grown up in bush, ponds that are not being used, and some of them have become dumping grounds for derelict vehicles and so on. And while not interfering with anybody who wants to be in agriculture, we have to protect those who are conscientious by giving them land and deal with those who are just holding on to the land without doing anything. In terms of the agri-incentive, there have been several persons from this constituency who have benefited, and they include some legend, Mr. Felix Clark. On this end of the scale, Mr. Paul Defoe, who happens to be the very first person enrolled in an agriculture program in a youth camp in Trinidad and Tobago, is Paul Defoe, who at 80-something is not only an excellent farmer, but one was excellent enough to get the 100,000 grant that we've offered. And there have been other persons. The Ashby couple, young couple in this constituency, land tenure issues, young couple who are beekeepers, they have the Pasquala brand. Christopher Springer, a well-known livestock farmer in Wallerfield, been around a long time, and several other persons. You know, when people say, think about it, that you never see somebody in front of the TV camera, in front on the radio, anything, saying, listen, I collect 100,000 check from the government today. You never hear that. You never hear that, but I'm telling you that agri-incentive was an important intervention to make a change in the way we do farming. I know my time is limited, so I want to close on two things. I want to talk about the Aripo Livestock Project, because one of the things I told those opposed to us in the Standing Finance Committee, at some point I said to them, between 2010 and 2015, there was no agriculture project under your administration. I didn't say private sector, you know. I said there was none. And not one of them challenged me. Not one of them. I said I could give you the rest of the fiscal year. Nobody could point to a single agriculture project executed by the UNC 2010 to 2015. None. A lot of them could tell you there's a list that Kamala keeps regurgitating all the time. Ved Seram is a fellow who could write, and he writes the same speech for her every year about bringing back sugar and doing this and doing that, but they can't point to one project. We could point to many, including what we keep saying. At any given time in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been about 200 million in private sector investment in agriculture. About 200, not our money, their money. But Aripo, a non-functioning, non-performing 1,400-acre facility, we were able to put it out in a very fair and transparent process, extending the time for submissions over and over, doing site visits over and over. And eventually it found its way into private hands. And I was surprised in July when I had to answer a question in the parliament or respond to a motion late one night. And I was surprised that the investment already made is $22 million. And in fact, Prime Minister and I went not long after and saw it for ourselves. And that investment will end up being about $60 to $80 million of private sector. If the private sector, 60 to 80 in Aripo, the new private sector facility in Couva, 60 million private sector money. The new hatchery in Couva, 80 million private sector money. Central Farms Duck Farm, $25 million in private sector money. If the private sector is seeing the opportunity that exists and feeling confident in the government to do their investment, then we don't need anything. We don't need the opposition to tell us anything. We know what we will get from them. And I'll tell you now that during the course of this last week, we put 790 acres in La Gloria, wasted land, former Caroni 1975 Limited. Every one of the talkers will tell you what to do with that land. Every one of the talkers will tell you what to do with the land. And we put it out there. Today was the site visit. People came. We said you don't have to take all. You could take 100 it in 100-acre blocks. The point I am making is that those who talk on the radio and on the TV and all of that about agriculture, those mouths that always willing to move, don't have a pocket to dip in to feed this country. And that is why I really don't take them on. We do what we have to do. We have an expression of interest in the National Seed Bank in Chagaramas, where when you got your Growth Trinbago seeds last year, they came from there, a facility that we met abandoned, and we've been able to resuscitate. There is an expression of interest for development of a modern nursery facility there. We had a site visit this morning. The talkers did not show up. There's no doom, there's no gloom to report on. We have one coming out in Guayaguayare, the former breeding unit of the ministry, being put out there for private sector. And I'll tell you this, I'm talking about big parcels now. As we go along, you would see smaller and smaller parcels coming through expressions of interest. And it is open to everybody. So I want to thank you very much. This is my first appearance since the general election of last year. I ran again, I came closer, and the Prime Minister in his wisdom returned me. I want to thank you for your support for the party and for the support for all of us in the election. I want to thank you for your prayers and everything that you've been doing with us, for us. I want to say to you that that budget represents the best that could be offered given the circumstances that we find ourselves with, that people sometimes conveniently forget. There are a lot of opportunities there for this country, and most importantly, what my colleague, Foster Cummings, and what I have spoken about represent great opportunities for the young people of this country if only they take the opportunity to grasp it. Great is the PNM, and we shall all prevail.